Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. Today I've got a preview of my upcoming book, which is called Prevent Slip Accidents with Slipology, that's being released on the 18th of September. And I'm going to read out the first 5 chapters as a bit of a taster preview for you. I'd love for you to join me on the 18th as I'll be hosting a live book launch webinar at 12:30 p.m. UK time. You can find details of this in the show notes or go over to my LinkedIn and you'll see the details there. So without further ado, here's the opening section of my new book, Prevent Slip Accidents with Slipology. I hope you enjoy it. Cheers. The £1 million slip. He was going to be in pain for the rest of his life until he passed away. His mobility was limited to a point where he couldn't really do anything. Justin Strange. We will always take action where we deem it necessary to protect the public. This case sends out an important message highlighting the need for businesses to comply with health and safety law and take all appropriate measures to prevent risk of injury to their employees and the public. Councillor Julie Banks, Portfolio Holder for Community and Regulatory Services at Dacorum Borough Council. It was a sunny morning in August 2015 when 91-year-old Dennis Satchell set out for his weekly shop at the Tesco Extra in Jarman Way, Hemel Hempstead. A sprightly pensioner, Mr. Satchell had always prided himself on his independence. Little did he know that this routine trip would change his life forever. As he pushed his trolley into the meat and dairy aisle, Mr. Satchell's feet suddenly slipped from under him. In a heart-stopping moment, he crashed to the floor, his hip taking the brunt of the impact. The pain was excruciating, but it was nothing compared to the long-term consequences that would follow. Mr. Satchell had suffered multiple hip fractures. At his advanced age, such an injury was life-altering. Surgery followed, leaving him with femoral pin in his leg. A man who had been active and independent was now facing a future of limited mobility and constant pain. But this wasn't just a story of one man's misfortune. This simple slip was proven in court to be the result of systemic failings. One that not only produced a human cost to Mr. Satchell, but also reputational damage, administrative burden, and, crucially, a 7-figure financial cost. Slips aren't unexpected or unforeseeable. After all, they are the biggest cause of accident, injury and claim. But Tesco would, I'm confident, have felt they were managing slips pretty well. Most people tell me they're doing well whenever I ask them, after all. Strange, then, that the data suggests otherwise. This case exposes the inadequacy of common practices that many of us take for granted. How many times have you seen a yellow "Caution, wet floor" sign and assumed that was sufficient? How often have you walked past a potential hazard thinking, someone else will deal with that? The hard truth is this: a sign is not a solution. Absorbent materials are not a fix. These are temporary measures at best, and at worst, they're a fig leaf, a way of appearing to address a problem without actually solving it. Seeking to improve on the simple measures like training also, in my experience, doesn't cut the mustard. We must be more holistic in our approach. As you read this, I want you to pause and reflect. Think about your own workplace, your own practices. Are you truly doing everything you can to prevent slips? Or are you relying on the same old methods, the same assumptions that led to Mr. Satchell's life-changing injury? Have you ever laughed at a slip depicted in a cartoon, TV show or movie? Haven't you felt at some point in time like slips are inevitable, that they just can't be prevented. But at the same time, having a conflicting feeling that slips are simple, therefore we should easily be able to stop them. This book is going to challenge those assumptions. It's going to make you question everything you thought you knew about slip safety. It might make for uncomfortable reading at times, but I promise you this, by the time you finish, you'll have the knowledge and tools to truly make a difference. The £733,333.33 fine Tesco received was just the tip of the iceberg. The true cost of that single slip was far greater. In financial terms, the total cost of dealing with this incident, civil claim, legal costs, etc., would have exceeded £1 million. But also there's human suffering, lost trust and damaged reputation. It's a cost that no business can afford to bear, especially when a criminal fine like this comes straight from the bottom line. Even a behemoth like Tesco can't just write off a 7-figure cost. So ask yourself this, can you afford not to take slip safety seriously? Can you look your customers, your staff, your shareholders in the eye and tell them that you're doing everything possible to keep them safe? If the answer is no, or even if you're not sure, then read on, because the next slip in your business could cost a lot more than you think. And unlike Tesco, you might not get a second chance to get it right. I once saw an advert for a psychiatric clinic which said, if you think you might need therapy, you do. Here's my version. If you think you might be able to improve your slip safety, you can. Read on and I'll share how. Slipology. What's that all about then? Until you take a scientific approach, you'll never achieve 100% certainty that your slip risks are under control. There we go, the shortest book in history. Whilst I could stop there, as that is in a nutshell the key message I want you to take from reading this book about slipology, I also really want you to understand why it's important to tackle the slip problem, what are the key elements to success in this area, who are the organisations that have already achieved great results. Personally, my big, hairy, audacious goal is to drive a reduction in the number of slip accidents across the globe each year of 500,000 plus. If that sounds like a game worth playing, then read on and join me. Together, we can make a big impact by applying a few key principles. Over the last 12 years, I've focused my time, effort and energy on trying to reduce the number of slip accidents, injuries and claims. What is a slip? Slips happen when there is some kind of contamination between the foot and the floor, which causes a loss of grip. This is different from a trip, where a foot catches a low-level obstacle. A reading note. When I speak about the conditions of a slip, I'll refer to a floor being wet. Please note that this phrase is interchangeable with wet or otherwise contaminated, which is a mouthful, and I'm using wet for clarity and to reduce verbosity. Powder or dust on a floor, for example, can be just as slippery as if the floor were wet, but testing the slip resistance of a floor, more on that later, requires a standardised approach, so water wet is used as a state to compare to being contaminated in any way. Here's what I've learned over the past decade plus. There is a predictable pathway to at least halving your slip incidents. That's right, a 50% plus reduction in accidents, injuries and claims is more than possible. I've seen this in railway stations, hotels, swimming pools, restaurants, universities, manufacturing facilities. I've seen it in buildings with millions of footfall each year. I've seen it in settings that are constantly wet. Why does a shower exist after all, if not to be wet? One of the great things about what I do is that I get to see all sorts of different building types, and it's possible to measurably and predictably reduce risk in all of them. Imagine having fewer accident forms to complete, not needing to deal with insurers and lawyers, but also the feeling of being able to sleep soundly at night because you know your colleagues and customers weren't going to be hurt any time it rained or someone spilled something on a floor. You'd then be able to focus on other things and get the irritation of regular slip and fall incidents off your desk. You'd achieve clarity, certainty and time freedom. You'd also be saving significant amounts of cost, both human and financial. In short, this book aims to share the roadmap to achieving those more positive states. Slipology is the method I've decoded to get from A to B in the most straightforward way. If you're a safety, risk, insurance or facilities professional, Slipology will help you to better understand why slips and falls happen. Put in place practical and quantifiable steps to reduce risk and have the confidence and certainty to prove what you've done and why. Think of slips being like a river filling up a lake, with the lake being cost, financial, human, admin, reputation, etc. In this book, you'll learn how to A, build a dam across the river to stem the flow of the water, have fewer accidents in the first place. B, build some highly effective drainage pipes to take water out of the lake, protect and defend your organisation and yourself, even if an incident does happen. Read this book until the end, implement its strategies, and you'll benefit from a proven toolkit that could save you hundreds of hours, thousands of forms, emails and reports, and hundreds and thousands of pounds of costs. But before we start to get into the detail, you're probably thinking, how did Christian get so passionate about slip and fall accidents? So let me tell you a story. May 13th, 2012. The safety of the people shall be the highest law. Marcus Tullius Cicero. If you're a football fan, you'll likely remember this day well, as it was when Manchester City won the Premier League for the very first time, with striker Sergio Aguero scoring in stoppage time, accompanied by an iconic piece of commentary by Martin Tyler. Around the world, news on this day was more sobering. In China, torrential rain in the Hunan province destroyed a bridge and 3,500 homes, displacing 28,000 people. Arsala Rahmani, a key peace negotiator for the Afghan government, is shot dead by assassins in Kabul. Several people are killed in clashes in the Lebanese city of Tripoli between supporters and opponents of the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in a violent spillover from the Syrian civil war. In London, where I live, conversely, there was a tangible party atmosphere in the air. It had been building up for months in anticipation of the 2012 Olympics, which would start in only 2 months. At this time, I lived not too far from the Olympic Park. I would sometimes, not often, jog along the Regent's Canal through Victoria Park and be within a stone's throw. My 30th birthday was approaching in June, and in a time before kids, weekends for my wife, then girlfriend, and I were fairly relaxed affairs. For example, sleeping in to recuperate from a hard week of work, and perhaps, to be fair, the odd glass of wine on Friday and Saturday evenings. This particular Sunday we woke up late-ish, then I popped around the corner to grab us a croissant from the local deli. We decided it would be fun to visit Columbia Road flower markets, where you can buy all sorts of stunning flowers, enjoy the vibrant atmosphere, and grab a light bite for lunch. We drove so we could pop into Sainsbury's on the way home to get some groceries and the Sunday Times. We didn't own a car at that time, so whenever I had a hire car for work, we took advantage. Leaving Columbia Road, we drove to Islington, parked the car in the Sainsbury's car park, and, because there's no direct entrance into the store, stepped through the barrier and walked around the corner onto Tolpuddle Street. That's the last thing I remember for several hours. dazed and confused, feeling a weird sense of discomfort, but also heady intoxication. That's what morphine does to you. The next thing I can really recall is lying in a hospital bed in University College Hospital. My girlfriend next to me, her mother and half-sister there too. It transpired that, as she and I were walking towards the store, a car sped around the corner of the T-junction at the bottom of Tolpuddle Street. We assume it must have been accelerating to squeeze through a red light. Going too fast, it violently shook from side to side as it lost control, before mounting the curb and ploughing into me. The car hit me from my left. Thankfully, my wife was to my right and remained unhurt physically, though for her the mental scars almost lingered longer, as she can vividly recall the whole incident. Interestingly, even 12 years later, the event remains a total blackout in my memory. It's amazing what the mind can do to protect you from trauma. I suffered a long list of injuries. Broken collarbone, where I now have a metal plate inserted. Broken wrist, broken ankle, scars, thankfully on my face, only in my eyebrow, so it's not really visible. 7 to 10 year accelerated wear damage to my neck, cuts, bruises, scrapes and bumps aplenty. Those were the main physical ailments. On top of that, the accident took a toll on me mentally too. It took probably a month until I felt physically okay-ish, probably 3 months until I felt more or less normal, with ongoing issues with my wrist and ankle requiring physio. But it was a good few months until I stopped feeling an acute sense of dread, which I think I hid well from others, about walking alongside a road. Even to this day, I am much more attuned to the speed of cars than 99.9% of people as I walk down the pavement. I am pleased to say, though, that any fear has long since gone. You probably won't be shocked to hear that, since that day, I've been passionate about safety. HSE uses a phrase, shattered lives, a few years back to describe the effects of accidents. And I fully buy into this. It's not until you experience this for yourself that you realise just how much of your life can be shattered, just how quickly this can occur, just how much a moment can matter. And look, I was very lucky overall. On my Safety and Risk Success podcast, I've interviewed people who suffered permanent disabilities from accidents. I'll share some terrible, tragic slip stories throughout this book. It's amazing what happens to you if you experience a serious accident that wasn't your fault. Not only did it give me a fresh perspective on life, it drove me to want to make a difference in the world and keep other people safe so they wouldn't have to suffer like I did. Working in road safety may have seemed an obvious approach, but if you review the data, we've made great strides in this area already. Arguably, the possible improvements left to achieve are relatively minimal. Before my work in safety, I trained as a management consultant, advising private equity firms on which companies to buy, how to grow them, and where they could maximise the return on investment. So it's no surprise that I took a management consultant's analytical approach to moving from a passion and interest in the importance of safety to figuring out into which niche of that massive world I should focus my time and effort. Taking my analytical brain, I researched what was the biggest area of safety where we hadn't managed to find an effective, holistic, and widely adopted solution. That's when I came across slips. I'll share some more detailed data with you as we go on this journey, but for now you should know that 1. Slips are the biggest cause of accidents, injuries, and insurance claims, even though every building I've ever visited has some kind of slips, trips and falls risk assessment, policy and procedure in place. 2. We seem to have concluded that these incidents are somehow inevitable or unpreventable. 3. Further, they are often the source of humour. 4. As such, we're not doing all we can to solve the problem. We're doing the basics, but we're not drilling down deeply enough. Add all these points together and throw in my passion for safety, and hopefully you can now see why I'm working in this field and why I've written this book. I'm afraid I can't stop a reckless driver going too fast, but I can help you to stop slips in your building. Looking back now, I have several insights about that day in May 2012. First, I always say I was clearly very unlucky that it happened in the first place, but incredibly lucky that it wasn't much worse. Second, the driver was also very fortunate. The accident happened close to a busy bus stop. It easily could have been an OAP or a child that she hit, and they likely wouldn't have been able to withstand the impact the same way that I, as a 6'3" healthy man, did. Third, we mustn't forget the personal effect on the driver. After all, I'm certain that she didn't set off that day with the intention of hurting someone. No one does. It's easy to linger on blame, and often the person that suffers an accident suffers blame from others. It's healthier to focus on understanding and empathy. Fourth, no amount of money is enough to repay someone for their suffering. I received a decent sum of money through my personal injury claim, but nowhere near enough for me to feel like it was worthwhile. And fifth, we must do all we can to keep people safe from preventable incidents that can dramatically affect their lives. Stanley May's tragic slip death. An exceptional man in good health, Stanley May was a well-respected member of the local community, known for his love of gardening and his active involvement in local charity events. A former chairman of St Enida Parish Council, Mr May was a member of the co-op and would visit their shop most days. That's exactly what he was doing in July 2015, walking through the co-op store in the centre of Truro, Cornwall. This day would be different though. Tragedy struck when Mr May must not have noticed a yellow "Caution wet floor" sign and slipped in a puddle of water, banging his head on the floor. He passed away a couple of days later due to a subdural hematoma. You don't expect to die in the supermarket. You don't expect to die from a slip. Water was leaking from a broken sandwich chiller for almost 44 hours. Engineers came to fix the chiller, and it seemed like they had succeeded at first. However, the chiller started leaking again, leading to a tragic accident. On the day of the incident, the leak wasn't reported as a problem, and the only warning was the yellow wet floor sign. The incident led to a prosecution by Cornwall Council for breaches of health and safety duties. Judge Simon Carr said what happened was, quote, "so easily avoidable." He added, the company tried to address the problem, but did so inadequately. Sarah Jane Brown, investigating officer from Cornwall Council, said, "This case demonstrates the importance of slip risks being adequately controlled. It should serve as a warning to the retail industry, and particularly supermarkets, that signage alone is not an adequate control. Proactive measures must be taken to either prevent floors becoming slippery or precluding public access." Conclusion. If you have a floor that is slippery when wet, you need to do one of three things. 1. Stop it getting wet so it remains safe. 2. Stop anyone from being able to walk on it whilst it's wet. Or 3. Stop it being slippery so it can be walked upon safely even when it's wet. The co-op was fined £400,000 by Cornwall Council. There was also a civil insurance claim. Stanley's family was devastated by his sudden and tragic death. His daughter, Sarah May, spoke about the incident, saying the family was heartbroken by the loss of her father. Amplifying the family's loss, Mr May's wife passed away a short time later. Mr May's unfortunate passing highlights the critical need for attention to slip safety, a concern that's often overlooked or not taken seriously enough. If you work in safety, risk management, insurance, or facility management, you hold the power and the duty to stop such tragedies from happening again. Learning about Slipology is more than just meeting safety standards. It's about creating a culture that values safety, one that protects lives and keeps our community strong. It means realising that preventing just one slip can save a life, keep a family together, and maintain the rhythm of a community. If you're reading this book, I'm sure you are proactive, compassionate, empathetic, and a person who would want to mitigate this risk. As we explore Slipology further, you'll see its potential to dramatically reduce slip accidents and make places safer for everyone. I invite you to embark on this journey of learning and improvement with me. This book is not only about understanding how to prevent slip accidents, it's a reflection of our shared dedication to putting safety first, not just in words, but as a fundamental principle, a core value, and a way of life. Safety is our number one priority is a ubiquitous statement. Sadly, it's often a platitude. But by using science to solve the largest cause of accidents, injuries and claims, you can truly stand behind this statement with the proof to back it up. The slip problem. 4 common misconceptions about slip safety. A pharmacy faced a recurring safety concern at its entrance, a sloped area with an anti-slip mat and hazard tape. Despite these measures, a day in winter witnessed 4 slips recorded on CCTV, while a staff member was occupied with patients and interrupted during cleaning duties. Although a wet floor sign was displayed, the absence of the colleague for approximately 10 minutes left the area unattended. Consequently, members of the public inadvertently stepped onto the wet floor and subsequently onto the anti-slip mat, resulting in falls down the slope. While 3 patients left quickly, looking embarrassed, 1 individual returned, expressing immediate discomfort due to a sore back. The incident was promptly escalated to head office, where assurances were provided regarding the presence of anti-slip flooring, suggesting no further action was warranted. However, staff revealed that similar incidents occurred during rainy days, indicating a potential flaw in the anti-slip mat. Despite suspicions regarding the mat's age and durability, head office remained locked in their stance, shifting focus towards employee conduct rather than addressing the root cause. Suggestions to improve staffing levels and prioritise employee well-being as a proactive measure were proposed by me, but were met with resistance due to corporate constraints and ultimately the sale of the company. My guess is they didn't want to spend any money or highlight potential flaws that could deter future buyers. Typical. This story, sent to me by an industry friend after I requested some anecdotes for this book, is a great example of some of the commonly held misconceptions about slip safety. Dealing with slip safety, we often encounter a set of beliefs that, while widespread, are actually holding us back from making real progress. I call this the slip problem, where slip stands for S, simple, L, low cost, I, impossible to prevent, P, paltry. Let's unpack each of these misconceptions and see why they're so problematic. Slips are S, simple, e.g., just put out a yellow sign and you're covered. How often have we heard this? The idea that slip prevention is simple is perhaps the most pervasive and damaging misconception. It leads to a superficial approach that barely scratches the surface of the problem. Picture an iceberg. Above the waterline, you see the common practices: yellow wet floor signs, spillage control, and cleaning record check sheets. These are visible and easy to implement, but they're only a small part of the story. The real substance, the scientific approach to slip prevention, lies beneath the surface. As Cornwall Council aptly put it, signage alone is not an adequate control. Slip prevention isn't simple, it's subtle. It requires a deeper understanding and a more nuanced approach, than many realise. Slips are L, low cost, e.g. it's okay, our insurance will cover it. This belief often leads to complacency, but let's look at the numbers. AXA Insurance reports that slips were their number one cost of claims, totalling 2.5 times more than manual handling. Ask yourself, are you putting 2.5 times as much effort into slip prevention as you are into manual handling? If not, you might be underestimating the true cost of slips. Remember, insurance doesn't cover everything. There are human costs, potential criminal fines, and hidden uninsured costs. Saying that, about 20 to 25% of your liability insurance premium likely relates to potential slip incidents. We mustn't forget criminal fine costs too. Tackling slip safety head-on can lead to significant financial savings. Slips are I, impossible to prevent, e.g. whatever you do, you're bound to get slip accidents. This fatalistic attitude is far from the truth. Over the years, we've helped thousands of sites to reduce their slip risk significantly. My average client achieves a 57% plus reduction. We'll look at plenty of case studies as the book progresses. Importantly, these aren't flukes or one-offs. They're the result of applying a scientific, systematic approach to slip prevention. Follow the steps in this book and you can achieve the same results. Slips are P, paltry or insignificant. E.g., loads of people slip over, but very few get hurt. This misconception downplays the seriousness of slip accidents, but the reality can be far more severe. Let me share a few sobering examples. Alison Hockday, a former occupational therapist who lost a leg after 2 slip accidents. Andreas Wuchner, a business owner who suffered traumatic brain injuries after slipping on some Baileys at Heathrow Airport. Tommy Kelly, who was forced to learn to walk again after he suffered a brain injury in a fall. He slipped on ice, hit his head, and spent 3 months in a coma. Malcolm White, who lost his leg after a slip incident. Eugenie Bouchard, a famous tennis player who slipped in a locker room at the US Open and suffered a concussion. Even closer to home, one of my best friends slipped when she was 7 months pregnant. She shattered her ankle, ended up in a wheelchair until she could be operated on. This had to be after the birth. What should have been one of the happiest times of her life, the birth of her second child, was overshadowed by pain, surgery, and a difficult recovery. These aren't just statistics, they're real people whose lives were dramatically altered by slip accidents. Here's the truth of the matter. Slips are serious, scientific, and stoppable. Don't accept that slips are a, quote, easy matter to solve. If they were, wouldn't we have done it already? By reframing our approach and moving past these misconceptions, we can, however, make real progress in preventing slip accidents. Remember, without a scientific approach, you'll never achieve 100% certainty that your slip and fall risks are under control. But with the right mindset and methods, you can make a significant impact on slip safety in your organisation. It's time to dive beneath the surface and tackle the slip problem head on.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.